Chapter 90, Opening the Sky. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 90. Opening the Sky. Was Ing Yen killed so easily? Ing Yen just got killed so easily. Ji Hao felt that his entire body was frozen, as cold as ice. He gazed at the blood-red moon in the sky, and couldn't let any word out for quite a while. He then slowly put Man down on the ground. Man's face had now been covered by tears. She was blinking her eyes rapidly and staring at Ing Yen's body, yelled with a trembling voice, "Old Yen. No, Old Yen. Please don't die. I'll never bully your grandchildren again. Please don't die. While crying, Man grabbed Ji Hao's arm hard with both her hands. Her huge strength even made Ji Hao's arm's bones emit a cracking sound. If Ji Hao hadn't absorbed large amounts of essence milk of the earth and one piece of essence crystal of the earth, his arm would have been broken by Man long ago. Even then, Ji Hao still felt a great pain coming from his arms, which woke him up from his deepest despair, and forced him to focus on the current situation. Whatever this is, break. Ji Hao shouted out. Afterwards, he whispered a spell from the mantra Dan with 9 secret words. Before his voice faded, from his right hand, a sphere of firelight spurted out and started transforming under the control of the mantra Dan with 9 secret words, S power. After absorbing enough natural power from the surrounding jungle, the fiery light had condensed into a sphere of glowing red, lighting bolts. Ji Hao threw the lightning bolt sphere towards a wisp of blood-red smoke, which was about 1,000 feet behind him, with all of his strength. Followed by a loud boom, the sphere of fiery lightning bolts burst against the wisp of blood-red smoke. However, the blood-red smoke, that seemed hazy and weak, didn't even move a little bit. A huge flame and lighting had been caused by the explosion of the fiery lighting sphere, along with waves of scorching air, flying towards Ji Hao. Ji Hao's long hair blew upwards by the hot air and stood straight up towards the sky. "It's useless. You stupid little bastard," yelled Du Luo while crushing the rose in his hand into ashes. He then pointed his finger at Ji Hao and shouted furiously, "It's all useless. No matter how hard you try. It is the hazy blood moon ghost-killing formation, a deadly formation. It's made by a powerful master with the blood-moon bloodline of the Xiu clan. He made this especially for our blood fawn. There is no way for you to break out of this formation. All you can do is raise your hands and wait to be captured by us." Di Luo pulled out a long sword, pointed the sword tip at Ji Hao, then continued, "I remember that you chopped off my arm and dug out my eyeball. You wild, stinky barbarian, what you have done to me, I will do back to you. But hundreds, thousands of times worse." Man's guards ran down the stairs and stood in front of Man, forming a semicircle, while shielding Man and Ji Hao behind them. "Young master. You go figure a way to get out here, we will stall these guys," said a guard in a low voice. The pretty face of Man suddenly became embarrassed. She kept her head down, slowly took out the red tablet that she had used to hurt the mountain god not long ago, and said in a low voice, "Without the sunrays, this tablet given by Abba, can't be refilled, using the energy of the sun, it's useless now. Those other treasures that Abba and Amma had given me, I didn't bring any of them with me, because I thought that they would be inconvenient." The faces of the tens of guards suddenly became deadly pale, endless despair had filled their pupils. Hee. A sharp, dramatic laughter came from the blood-red smoke. Followed by the voice, Jiang Yao slowly walked out dramatically. She was wearing an extremely luxurious cloak, with one hand holding a bloody human head. After she walked out of the smoke, she threw the human head towards Ji Hao. The head rolled down the stairs along with rub. Dub sounds, leaving large amounts of half-curdled blood on the stairs. Hundreds of dark-skinned slave warriors of the blood fawn walked out of the smoke while laughing viciously. Each of them had been holding a couple of human heads in their hands. They then threw those heads down the stairs one after another. Thousands of human heads thudded against the stairs and rolled down. The scene was like the most horrible nightmare. A fury instantly hit right into Ji Hao's head from his heart. These were the 3,000 young boys and girls from the Fire Crow clan, who had been all brought here by Ji Hao himself. They were all dead. They were all brutally killed and beheaded. Looking at the badly mutilated faces of theirs, Ji Hao couldn't even imagine how hopeless and fearful they were before they died. Jiang Yao! Jia Hao roared, tendons standing out under Ji Hao's skin all over his body. He pointed his finger at Jiang Yao and growled hoarsely, "I will chop you into pieces. I will. Filthy bitch. And Ji Shu, Jiang Bo, anyone related to you. None of them can live." Jiang Yao twisted the slim waist of hers, letting out a smile. She stood beside Di Luo, chuckled and crooked her finger towards Ji Hao and said, "Do you want to kill me? Come, just do it. Look, so many kids of your Fire Crow clan had been slaughtered by us, do you feel any pain about it? Do you?" Ji Hao didn't respond, only glared at Jiang Yao. "Scream, just scream it out. I know that it must be hurting badly, and you must be so angry. That's how I felt when you got Wu killed. This is how angry I was." Jiang Yao's face gradually became twisted as she started screaming with a piercing voice, and her beautiful eyes had now been filled with blood, turning into a scary blood-red color. "Do you know how badly that hurt? My son. Wu. My only, dearest son," screamed Jiang Yao, "even if he was going to be killed by someone, then that should have to be me. Only I could do that. Not you bunch of lowly, stupid crow people. I, Jiang Yao, am the daughter of the master Magus priest of the Bai Fong clan. I have a noble bloodline and a noble family background. I am the noblest woman. My son was also one of the noblest people in the world. And he got killed by you. You. A little bastard." Jiang Yao had gone hysteric, not even being able to make a whole sentence, and her fingers had been twisted like chicken claws, madly waving in the air. "Run, struggle, hurry, do all you can and try to figure a way out of this." Jiang Yao gasped heavily, waving her arms in the air, and growled, "Despair. Cry. Scream. Because you only have a quarter of an hour left. I give you a quarter of an hour so you can figure out how to get out of this formation. You should try your best to cry and scream and kneel down on the ground. And beg to live. If you can't get out, I will kill you. All of you." "Huh, you heard the lady." Di Luo laughed out, then pointed his finger at the blood-moon in the sky. A beam of sharp, yet phantom-like blood-red light, flashed through the air. In the next second, the mountain god, who had been standing in front of Man with both of his arms opened, let out a muffled groan and his gigantic body then fell hard on the ground. A punctured hole was showing up on his forehead. The mountain god's accompanying animal let out a shrill wail, running fast around the mountain god's body, and ceaselessly moaning like a hurt puppy. The blood-red light flashed across the air again and again. The tens of guards standing in front of Man fell down on the ground one after another. All of them were either punctured in the chests, or their stomachs were ripped apart and bared their squirming internal organs, or arms or legs been chopped off. Every single one of them had been seriously injured within a moment and fell onto the ground, and couldn't help but shout out in pain. "Hurry! Ji Hao! I gave you a quarter of an hour, to break out from the formation." Jiang Yao's face was blushing in utmost excitement, laughing insanely and yelled, "Don't say that I, your auntie, am bullying you. Once you break this formation, I will allow you another quarter of an hour to run away from us." Ji Hao growled in rage, turned around and threw tens of fiery lightning bolts onto the blood-red smoke wisp behind him. Mr. Crow, who had been standing on Ji Hao's shoulder all this time, let out a resonant call, flapped his wings and released a huge beam of flames towards the blood-red smoke. However, the wisp of blood-red smoke stayed absolutely still. Di Luo sniffed, pointed his finger again at the blood-moon, another beam of blood-red light darted over, and punctured Mr. Crow's body from the chest to the tail. Mr. Crow fell on Ji-Hap's shoulder, couldn't stop twitching while hot blood gushed out of his body. "Kid, try to break this strategy with only your own power, not this bloody huge crow." Di Luo looked down at Ji-Hao proudly, and laughed out loud as if he was the god who had been dominating the entire world. Inside Ji-Hao's spiritual space, the mysterious man opened his mouth and let out a resonant voice. "Little guy, during all these days, I have been studying on your mantra Dan with nice secret words. I learned something interesting from it, combined it with my own power, and made something new. Let go of your mind and let me take control of your body temporarily. I will use the sky opening, with your body, which should be able to break this formation." Without any hesitation, Ji-Hao gnashed his teeth and instantly drew all of his spiritual power back into his Yuan Dan. The mysterious man took a deep breath, and slowly stood up from the white, foggy flat. This seemed to be the first time that Ji-Hao saw him standing up, during all these years. The mysterious man then made a weird posture. Followed by this move, Ji-Hao's body made the same posture. Then, led by the mysterious man, Ji-Hao thrust out the forefinger of his right hand, and drew a simple yet mysterious arc that was very hard to describe, in the air. The skin and flesh on Ji-Hao's finger suddenly exploded, leaving the finger bone, which was shining with a dim light. The badly damaged finger of Ji-Hao slightly touched the blood-red smoke, which had been blocking their way out, while spurting large amounts of blood. Chapter 91, Runaway. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 91. Runaway. Just like a flower bud that opened its first crack, and showed a slight little part of the soft and tender petal. Just like a cocoon suddenly cracking, and the delicate newly grown wings slowly thrust out from it. Just like the shell of a golden cicada that had just spit up, and the patagium that came out of it along with a slight singing sound. Just like the shooting stars that flew across the sky, and the lighting that tore apart the dark clouds, like the sun that had been blazing in the sky without any blockage, and the rivers rapidly flowing on the earth. Countless illusions appeared in front of Ji-Hao's eyes, including the earth splitting up and the sky falling down, the sun rising and sinking over and over again, the gale which was soaring towards the sky and the clouds which were rolling like sea waves, the flowers bloomed then withered, the rain came and stopped, the snow fell down and melted. At the moment when his finger slightly drew across the air, it felt like every secret of this entire world had been shown in front of his eyes. Ji-Hao clearly saw that a lot of spell symbols had been hidden inside the blood-red light, and formed a gigantic, complicated system, which seemed like a magic seal. His finger drew across the air, just like a sharp sword cutting into the most fragile crack of the huge net that was formed by those spell symbols. Just like how the flower bloomed, the cocoon cracked, just like the shell of the golden cicada which couldn't hold the thin, transparent patagium anymore, just like stars and the sun which had been following their own special, natural patterns, that was existing since the beginning of the world, ceaselessly rotating. An irresistible power tore the blood-red light apart, shattered the steady magical seal that was formed by the spell symbol system inside the light, and left a huge crack on the blood light. If there is a number that could represent the whole world, and it is 50, then 40.9 could be seen and used by us, while 1 would be hidden. In this vast world, there will always be a chance to break every single powerful treasure in formation. In other words, anything in this world, unless it had gone beyond the heaven and deeper than the underworld, has an exception to it. The sky opening technique is pointing directly at the one that is hidden inside this vast world. Once we find out the rip, and hit it straight on, we can break any formation in this world, said the mysterious man while drawing the arc in the air with a resonant voice. Such a shame, such a pity, such a sadness, but so be it. If I could understand this back in my time, like I do now, there was no way for me to end up like this. Little guy, what are you thinking about? Just run. Ji-Hao felt an incomparable pain coming from his soul. The Yuan Dan in his spiritual space was even about to explode. When he drew the arc along with the mysterious man's move, all kinds of illusions started flashing in front of his eyes, and all of the profound mysteries of this world had been clearly shown in front of his eyes. These abstruse, occult mysteries of the world were not something that Ji Hao could understand at the moment. He was like a tiny bug that stayed in the mud, which could never understand how those gods, who had been standing high above the sky, managed and ran this world. The tiny and weak soul of Ji Hao was like a mirror, copying all of the worldly mysteries. What had been contained in this copy was not as much as one of the trillions of the real worldly mysteries, however, it had already almost burst and vanished Ji Hao's weak and fragile soul. The mysterious man just lent a hand and broke the blood-moon hazy ghost kill formation. Not that Ji Hao didn't want to run at the moment, instead, his soul was about to explode, and couldn't support his body anymore. Ji Hao started vomiting blood, cracks started emerging on his soul, furthermore, a series of popping sounds came from inside his body. After he had drawn that arc in the air, almost all of the muscles of Ji Hao's right forearm had been blowing away by the counterforce, which bared more than a half of his arm bones, causing it to shine with a dim and crystal light. The counterforce went to the rest of his body along with his bone arms. Soon, countless small cracks appeared on his arms' bones and started expanding towards inside his body, then the hand bone, shoulder bone, ribs, spine, leg bones. Along with the sound of cracking bones, at least more than a half of Ji Hao's bones had been broken by the counterforce. Even if his soul wasn't hurt, and still capable of controlling his body, this body wouldn't be able to move intensely. However, a beam of light flashed through Man's pupils. She grabbed Ji Hao and threw Mr. Crow, who had been badly wounded, into Ji Hao's arms, then carried Ji Hao onto her shoulder like a straw man, and started running with all of her power. Man was extremely strong, and she run like the strongest and most barbarous beast, even too blustering to be reasonably described. She stamped her feet hard against the ground, and followed by a thunderous boom, a hundreds of feet wide and thousands of feet deep pit had been opened up in the ground. Man's body then was pushed up, darting straight into the dense jungle, leaving shreds of black afterimages behind her. The jungle was filled with gigantic, towering trees. Man rushed a whole 7 miles away using this single step. She glided across the air very close to the ground, and crushed at least hundreds of towering trees with her head. Behind her, countless trees were falling down onto the ground one after another. A straight and wide road had been opened up in the jungle by Man. Damn! Di Luo quivered in fright, then slapped hard on his own face. He raised his head up and looked at the blood moon in the sky. A clearly visible crack had already appeared on the hazy phantom of the moon. He couldn't believe it, and let out a high-pitched scream. This is the great powerful formation, made by a master of the Xiu clan. This kid. How could he break this formation? This was designed for the war. A vicious and greedy light shone in Jiang Yao's pupils. She screamed out as well, this kid must have some great treasure with him. Capture that kid and the little girl. If they get away, you people will be unable to leave the southern wasteland alive. Di Luo sneered, raised his arm and pointed at the moon. A beam of blood-red light darted out towards the direction that Ji Hao and Man had ran to. Afterwards, the blood moon in the air suddenly shattered into countless fragments, turned into countless blood-red light spots and dissipated in the air, disappearing completely. The great formation that had shrouded the entire area for nearly tens of miles around, had suddenly collapsed. Throwing a satisfied glance at Jiang Yao, Di Luo said confidently, "My dear Magus Priestess, our blood Fong are very powerful, even you have no idea about how powerful we really are. This southern wasteland is nothing but a barbaric, stinking land. We can come and leave as we want, nobody can hold us back, no one." Jiang Yao let out a creepy grin towards Di Luo, whispered a name, and said, that little girl, was his daughter. His youngest, most beloved daughter. And that little girl's Amma is from an even more noble family, her Amma is. Di Luo's face suddenly darkened and twisted. He gazed at Jiang Yao, with panic and despair filled in his face, abruptly leapt up and screamed, "Go! After them. We must get the little girl and the kid killed. Destroy every trace that was left by us here. All traces. Every single, slightest trace. We can't leave even a hint of scent or the tiniest hair here. Destroy them all. Destroy this place. Destroy. Di Luo nearly went mad. He pointed his finger at Jiang Yao's face and yelled, "You crazy woman. Do you want to get us killed? You are getting us killed. The blood fong can't deal with those horrible guys. I have to make this right, that I made a huge mistake." Jiang Yao exaltedly looked at Di Luo, who had fallen into a panic and didn't know what to do. She then laughed with a cold voice and said, "If not so, how could I say that? If you kill everybody in this manner, Ji Hao would be doomed. If that little girl died, not only Ji Hao, but also everyone related to him would have to die." All of Jia clan's warriors that had been following Di Luo, shouted out aloud, and rushed towards the jungle along with the broad road that had been opened up by Man Man when she carried Ji Hao and ran away. The tens of guards of Man Man let out a last roar, struggled up from the ground and rushed towards those Jia clan warriors, and tried their best to stop these monsters. Heavy swords and axes were raised up high in the air and chopped down towards the tens of guards. Soon, all of them had become piles of dead body parts. Over thousands of Jia clan warriors and 10,000 slave warriors of the Blood Fong, who seemed like the most vicious monsters that had got out of the hell, were chasing into the jungle while yelling and shouting. Chapter 92, Injuries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 92. Injuries. The endless rain seemed as if it was dominating the entire world. Man Man was carrying Ji Hao on her shoulder and running madly towards the north, like a fly without a head. While running, Man Man would let out a few sobs from time to time. Tears mixed with the rainwater, only a pair of red eye sockets could be seen. Man Man had purely relied on her instinct, running as fast as she couldn't even think of covering the traces she was leaving behind her. She ran 2 to 3 miles with a single step, and her terrifying strength left deep and huge pits on the ground every few miles. Her strong body smashed countless trees. With all these traces she had left behind her, even blind people could have easily found her. Ji Hao breathed difficultly. From inside the Yuan Dan in his spiritual space, silvery phoenix calls, occasionally, were coming out. The drop of phoenix blood that the mysterious man had given, had only tentatively merged with Ji Hao's body before. This time, Ji Hao's soul had almost exploded. This strike somehow completely triggered the drop of phoenix blood, which had been hidden in his soul for all this time. The phoenix blood drop had now turned into large amounts of purple mist and was merging with Ji Hao's soul. Ji Hao's soul was like a china bottle that had been nearly shattered by the force of the blood-red smoke. With the power of the phoenix blood, those cracks on his soul started to heal. Slowly, a mysterious, beautiful and novel purple light started flashing from deep inside his soul. The Yuan Dan, which was about to disintegrate, now quickly recovered under the nourishment of the purple mist, and started rotating fast. Soon, the rotating Yuan Dan began to extract the natural power from the surrounding jungle and was absorbing those powers to replenish its own, and healing itself. Along with the self-healing of the Yuan Dan and soul, Ji Hao finally got a slight trace of consciousness back. He raised his head from Man Man's shoulder. Abruptly, a slight wisp of purple mist flashed deep across the insides of his pupils. The world in his sight suddenly changed weirdly. At this moment, within the area of about 20 miles in radius, within which Ji Hao's spiritual power could reach, the paths of every single drop of rain could be seen clearly by Ji Hao, and the roots of every single gust of wind could be easily perceived by him as well. Within this moment, Ji Hao accurately predicted the movement of every single raindrop. In the next moment, he calculated the effect that every single gust of wind had on every single drop of rain. He could also clearly measure the sizes, weights, shapes of these raindrops, as well as the changes they would undergo by the air. Friction. This was almost an almighty and supreme ability. Ji Hao had been immersed in this magical situation that was beyond description, for about 1/1000th of a second, then completely ran out of the slight little bit soul power that he just had recovered back. Ji Hao spat a mouthful of blood out, shook his head in a flurry, and forced himself to come out from that magical state. This state was not for Ji Hao to reach with his current power. Not to mention that he was only a junior magi. Ji Hao even wondered if those that were senior magi, or even Magus kings were qualified to touch a magical world like th. Old man, you almost got me killed. Ji Hao complained in his head, even silently cursing the mysterious man for a while. Sky opening, which the mysterious man used to break the formation, just had ripped a thick, heavy curtain apart in front of Ji Hao, showing a magical world that was even hard to imagine for Ji Hao. However, even a single dirt of this world was way beyond the limit of Ji Hao's soul and spiritual power. Although he had gained benefits that he didn't know how to explain for now, but this had still almost got him killed. Breathing deeply, Ji Hao tried his best to breathe with the special method of the mantra Dan with 9 secret words. The natural power and life force energy became a different colored mist and was continuously being absorbed by Ji Hao's body. The multicolored flame in Ji Hao's lower belly was blazing. The tens of senior magi blood that he had gained from the tens of senior magi, who had been killed by him while fighting against the allied forces not long ago, were now floating above the multicolored flame. Around 70% of the senior magi blood that hadn't been digested by the flame yet, was now shining with a bright light, transforming into streams of multicolored light, and nourishing Ji Hao's entire body. Both Ji Hao's body and soul were being nourished by the lights, and the cracks on Ji Hao's bones started to heal quickly as well. Ji Hao got some of his power back. He raised his head, looked at the sky, then glanced at the jungle surrounding, gnashed his teeth in pain and said, Man, are you running towards the north? No, don't run that way, not the north. The Fire Crow clan is already the most northern clan of the southern wasteland. If we go further up north, nothing and no one would be there, except for completely primitive land. Man had been muddle-headed and was running without any thought for all this time. Hearing Ji Hao's words, she trembled, stopped running at a loss, stared at Ji Hao while sobbing, with her face filled with sadness and confusion, and asked, then where should we go? Old Yen died, Old Yen has been killed by them. No them why friends Xing, Hua, they're going to be so sad. Man cried out like a helpless poor little baby. She was a few months younger than Ji Hao. Even in the southern wasteland, she was only a little kid. Not to mention that she had been such a spoiled kid ever since she was a newborn baby. Yen had always taken care of everything for her, so how could she ever have suffered through any danger like this? Carrying Ji Hao and running out was already way beyond her experiences and capability, but this proved that this little girl had a conscience and was extra faithful to friends. Just after crying for a short while, Man abruptly spew a mouthful of blood out, onto Ji Hao's face and body. Man's blood was extremely hot, even as hot as the boiling lava that even burned Ji Hao's skin with a sizzling sound, nearly making him scream out in pain. This was the might of the great bloodline power that man's blood possessed, hidden inside man's body. However, this little girl hadn't activated this unimaginable powerful bloodline during all this time, and had only depended on her physical strength and running this far. Man, you're hurt. Ji Hao struggled down from man's shoulder, and looked at her back. Man's back was badly mutilated. Even Ji Hao couldn't help but gasp out of astonishment after seeing it, and instantly started feeling anxious for Man. When Man carried Ji Hao and rushed into the jungle, Di Luo had released all of the Blood Moon's power, before it collapsed, and threw a deadly attack at Man. Because the formation was completely broken after that, the attack had missed the vital parts of man's body, only hitting on the right side of her back. After Man had beaten the mountain god and turned him into her slave, she had gone to the mountain god's nest and mischievously gathered all kinds of precious stones in that cave. Back then, she felt that the armor she was wearing was a hindrance, so she had taken it off. Now she was only wearing a long dress made of golden red silk. Obviously, This long dress was also some kind of powerful magic treasure, almost blocking the attack launched by the blood moon with all of its remaining power. On Man's back, the long dress had been shining with a bright light, and a lot of spell symbols were flashing on the surface of the dress. However, the blood moon was way too powerful. It had opened a baby-fist-sized hole on the long dress, therefore, the right side of Man's back was nearly punctured. Through the bloody wound, Ji Hao saw her bone, which was glowing red and blazing like living charcoal, and her lung, which was squirming and spurting huge pieces of flame. Her lung was badly injured, so every time she tried to talk, a mouthful of blood would spew out from her mouth. With such a serious wound, this little girl, who had never been through any kind of life-threatening danger, had carried Ji Hao on her shoulder and ran this far for such long time. Good man, if it wasn't for you, we all would have died. Ji Hao was frightened by Man's wound. These kind of wounds would kill any ordinary people instantly. Fortunately, Man had an extremely strong body, so this wound only caused some effects to talking and moving abilities, and was not really threatening her life. Man grabbed Ji Hao's sleeve while weeping, and looked at Ji Hao with a pair of eyes that were filled with tears. Ji Hao had woken up, so Man, the little girl, suddenly lost her braveness, and didn't even know where to run. A few swishing sounds came from behind them. They had only stopped and talked for a short while, and the blood fong had already caught up. Ji Hao gently rubbed Mr. Crow, who had been huddled up in his arm and was trembling, held Man up, and carefully leapt high into the air, going into the misty, dense jungle. Unlike Man, who could even shake the earth while running, Ji Hao wasn't leaving even the slightest of trail behind him. He brought Man and disappeared into the dense jungle, just like a real phantom. TL note. Man surprised me, again. N1F, ed. Same. Chapter 93, Running Away from the Killers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 93. Running Away from the Killers, Medicine, Life-Saving Medicine. In the heavy rain, Ji Hao carried Man, whose body was boiling hot, and carefully climbed into a tree, searching for medicine in the dense branches and leaves. 1. Life, connecting grass, 100. Not golden vine, 3. Tiger tusk swirling blue bloom. The rainy season was a huge problem, not only to animals, but also to the herbal medicines, which could be easily found in other seasons but had now strangely disappeared. Only under the trees, where there were extremely dense branches and leaves piled up, and wasn't soaked in the rainwater, could some useful and sufficient powerful herbal medicine be found. After a quarter of an hour, Ji Hao put the few herbs he had found into his palm, crushed them into liquid, and slowly dripped it into Man's mouth. Man subconsciously swallowed the herbal liquid. Her scorching hot body cooled down a little bit, and the wounds on her back stopped bleeding. A very fast, transparent, thin film appeared, barely sealing the wound. Man, from now on, you have to learn some life-saving abilities, said Ji Hao in a low voice, while he carried her on his back and tied her and himself together tightly with a long vine. This is the southern wasteland. No matter how powerful your Amma and Abba are, how many brothers and sisters you have, and how many people are following your orders and working for you, in the southern wasteland, you can only survive if you are strong enough. Carefully climbing along a branch, Ji Hao surprisingly found a star mushroom, which was shining with a faint, silvery light, located beside a large bird nest. This kind of mushroom had absorbed the power of the stars for years, and contained an incomparably vast energy, which could be used as an effective medicine. This was the best quality material for making advanced magical medicines. Of course, it could also be directly eaten, after which its power would be released inside the human body. Inside the large bird nest, 2 gigantic golden-head turtle-doves had been huddled up together. Occasionally, raindrops splashed on their bodies, causing the 2 huge birds to quiver slightly, but their closed eyes had never opened. Ji Hao slowly put his hands towards the mushroom, while whispering to Man, like those life-saving treasures, given by your Abba and Amma, no matter if they're magic treasures or medicines, you should always carry them with you. You have already seen, even Uncle Ing Yen couldn't always protect you. Man nodded while tightly grabbing Ji Hao's shoulder with both of her hands, looking at Ji Hao's movements nervously. She didn't know what a star mushroom was. With her family background, she didn't need to learn this kind of stuff at all. Ever since she was a little girl, all kinds of magical medicines that she needed, even those legendary, secretively inherited medicines, would be eagerly offered to her by lots of Magus priests. She only knew that what Ji Hao was now trying to pick would be good to her body. At least, the herbal liquid that Ji Hao had fed her during the journey, had made her wounds start healing, and her body felt a lot better now. Man had already made up her mind that she would keep Ji Hao's words in her mind, and would never throw away those magical medicines and treasures, which were given by Abba, randomly. This time, she got injured, but she couldn't even find a single life-saving pill on her. Among those magical medicine that were given by Abba, there were countless kinds of medicines that could easily bring the dead back to life. As for magical treasures, if she didn't feel inconvenient and brought a couple of those powerful magical treasures with her, she could have easily broken even the horrible blood moon formation launched by Di Luo, with those magical treasures. Man was wrong, man is useless, murmured Man in a very low voice, while gnashing her teeth. You're not wrong, your Abba was wrong. Ji Hao gently patted Man's head and said, in the meanwhile, the other hand of his head grabbed the star mushroom. Man suddenly popped up her eyes and stared at Ji Hao in shock, as if she heard some incredible thing. Did Ji Hao say that her Abba was wrong? In the entire southern wasteland, no one ever dared to say such a thing about her Abba. Ji Hao had said it so easily and naturally, and more weirdly, she didn't feel any inappropriateness about Ji Hao's words. Her Abba really seemed wrong. If she had a little bit more fighting experiences in the jungle, and a slightly little bit more sense of danger. And if she hadn't been spoiled since she was a little girl, instead, practicing hard like Ji Hao, with the noble bloodline of her, she could have activated her bloodline power long ago. And if so, why would she be afraid of the blood Fang, who had been hunting them in the jungle? Abba was wrong, so was Man. Man gnashed her teeth tightly. The wound on her back suddenly twitched, and a stream of horrible, evil power attacked her entire body along with the blood vessels. Man was afraid that Ji Hao would worry about her and get distracted, so she gnashed her teeth, and spent all of her power to hold back the pain, which made her feel like all of her internal organs were being stirred by sharp blades. Ji Hao grabbed the star mushroom, pulling it backwards very slowly while vigilantly staring at the two gigantic birds in the nest. Golden-head turtle doves were not one of those brutal birds, however, their voices were especially sharp and resonant, able to transmit it in the jungle over a very long distance. If he ever disturbed these two birds and made them call out, they might not be able to hide from those blood Fang warriors, who had been madly searching for Man and him in the jungle. Nevertheless, the thing Ji Hao was worried most about happened at this exact moment. One of the two golden-head turtle doves suddenly opened its eyes. Ji Hao reacted really fast. He thrust out his right arm at lightning speed, which was still covered in blood, and grabbed the neck of this huge bird and twisted it until it broke with a cracking sound. However, the other golden-head turtle dove shrilly called out in fright, while popping its eyes open, and madly flapping its wings. The resonant chirps of the bird had transmitted nearly 1,000 feet far within one moment. Right after the bird had called out, sounds of people quickly running on water simultaneously came from two directions, 2,500 feet away, from the tree that Ji Hao had climbed on the left side, and 1,070 feet away, on the right side of the tree. After only the span of one breath, two groups of dark-skinned blood Fang's slave warriors rushed out of both sides of the jungle. One group had 8 warriors while the other group had 12 warriors. They're here. 14 blood Fang slave warriors raised their heavy swords high and rushed towards the tree. Among the rest of the 6 warriors, 5 of them pulled out long bows with metal strings opened, and shot over 30 long arrows towards Ji Hao in a row. The last warrior flicked his hand and threw a fingertip-sized round ball into the air. The round ball broke large amounts of branches and leaves and flew into the air, thousands of feet high from the ground, then exploded along with a thunderous boom. A phantom of a blood fong appeared in the air. In the meanwhile, sharp whistles came from the surrounding jungles. As one fell, another rose. Large groups of blood fong's warriors had been rushing over. Ji Hao let out a loud roar, pulling the long sword out while jumping down from the branch, with his face towards the ground and feet towards the sky. 30 arrows swished across the air and shot into the tree trunk, followed by rub. A-dub sounds. A few of the arrows were about to scratch his body. These arrows were all shot out with great strength. All of those 3 feet short arrows had easily punctured the gigantic tree trunk that would take 7 to 8 people to hold their arms around it, and left human head-sized holes in the tree trunk. Ji Hao fell down with his head towards the ground. In the air, his body weirdly spun around while fleetingly waving his right arm. He hacked towards the 14 warriors with the sharp, long sword that he had seized from a Blackwater Serpent Clan senior Magus hands. The sword sent out countless cold light spots, and silently swung towards those blood fong's warriors, along with a weird, magical arc. While waving his arm, Ji Hao had added a subtle and slight trace of power that he had learned from the sky opening, launched by the mysterious man earlier. The light thrown out by the sword seemed occult and mysterious, and straightly split the attacks launched by the 14 blood fong warriors apart through the weakest point of their attacks, puncturing their throats. The power released from the sword swept the entire area and sent 14 bloody human heads flying into the air. A sphere of golden, fiery light appeared behind Ji Hao's body, within which, a pair of fiery wings flashed across the air, and brought Ji Hao and Man into the dense jungle. Hundreds of blood fong's warriors gushed out of the surrounding jungles, however, not even a trace of Ji Hao could be found. Chapter 94, Fight and Kill. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 94. Fight and Kill. 20 of Blood Fong's slave warriors had been carefully walking in the dense jungle in a line, like the most ferocious and cunning hyenas. In the meanwhile, they were observing the surrounding areas down to the slightest spot, trying to find a trace of Ji Hao. The endless downpour of rain had brought tremendous troubles for their hunting, but they all believed that they could find Ji Hao. Di Luo had promised them that the team which would be able to catch Ji Hao alive, would, as a reward, be freed from slavery and become decent blood fong warriors. In order to get rid of their status as slaves and earn themselves a bright future, all of the blood fong's slave warriors had steeled their nerves and swore that they would capture Ji Hao alive. The last thing they would allow to happen here was to let that little bastard, Ji Hao, who had brought a badly wounded little girl with him, successfully get away. Right above this group of slave warriors, on a branch, Ji Hao had been calmly looking at these dark-skinned warriors who had been chasing him. Ji Hao's entire body was covered in branches and leaves, and completely merged with the shade of the tree. He had triggered the mantra Dan with 9 secret words, and perfectly restrained the sense of power that was being released from his own body. He had even temporarily stopped his own heart from beating. Taking a deep breath, Ji Hao focused on gathering his power. When the 12 slave warriors slowly walked past the tree that Ji Hao was hiding on, he quickly locked his fingers together and incanted a spell in a low voice. His Yuan Dan, which had completely absorbed the drop of phoenix blood and become many times more solid than before, started to rotate rapidly. All of the power contained in the Yuan Dan, then, was sent out within a moment. Within a radius of 1,000 feet, every drop of rain was simultaneously frozen into silver. White ice crystals. Countless white, long ropes, condensed by the ice crystals, were twisting in the air, and swinging towards those slave warriors, like silhouettes of a snake that came from the most horrible nightmare, even covering the sky. Those dark-skinned slave warriors screamed out in both rage and fear, madly waving the weapons in their hands and trying to break those ice-ropes that were coming towards them from all directions. However, there were too many of those ropes and they were too thick. After they chopped one rope off, countless ropes would come after it and coil around their bodies. Necks, wrists, ankles and waists, the bodies of these slave warriors were soon tightly bound by those ice-ropes that had been releasing a bone-piercing cold power. Even though they were struggling hard, they were unable to break loose within a short amount of time. The cold power ceaselessly drilled into their bodies, slowly making their bodies stiff and paralyzed. They madly shouted out, praying that their companions could hear their voices and come over to save them. However, Ji Hao had taken control of the entire area within 1,000 miles around him. All kinds of fluctuation of the air were under Ji Hao's control, which meant that the voices of those slave warriors would never be able to be transmitted through the air. Ji Hao held the long sword in his hands and leapt down from the tree. He narrowed his eyes, and saw the mysterious, magic arc loomingly appear in front of his eyes in his mind, that he had drawn along with the mysterious man's movement, at the time the mysterious man was controlling his body and launched, sky opening. He followed the exact same arc, waved his arms and threw out tens of beams of lights from the sword. The bright and sharp sword lights agilely skipped those interleaving ice ropes, and accurately ripped the throats of those slave warriors apart. Not even a drop of blood had come out of the bodies. All of the fresh blood inside the bodies of these slaves warriors had been frozen. Ji Hao quickly searched their bodies, found a small leather pack from the leader of this team, and poured a handful of round pills out of it. Ji Hao then slowly put these pills near his nose and took a sniff. Afterwards, he frowningly threw all the pills onto the ground and stamped them deeply into the mud. Those pills quickly melted in the mud, turning into a dark green, thick liquid, and started corroding the surrounding soil. Soon, a human head-sized hole had appeared in the ground. Jiang Yao, you are so clever. It seems that all of the life-saving medicines these slave warriors have are poisons. Ji Hao locked his fingers back together, and slightly waved his arms. Afterwards, the frozen rain water melted all at once, turning back into transparent raindrops and fell back on the ground, along with a clattering sound. Standing in the storm, large amounts of natural energy and power swooshed into Ji Hao's mouth and were absorbed by his body. After flowing along the meridians for a while, a wisp of purple smoke slowly puffed into his spiritual space and was absorbed by the Yuan Dan, which had been rotating rapidly. After the span of only tens of breaths, the Yuan Dan that had ran out of power just now, was fully refilled, and even improved a bit. After the quick consuming and refilling during these couple of days, the originally foggily hazy Yuan Dan had now condensed into a bean-sized sphere which was nearly solid, looking as if it had been forged by purple gold. Only needing a special moment, Ji Hao could then transform his Yuan Dan into a genuine substance, upgrading it into a new level that he never had been able to reach, not even in his previous life. Once the Yuan Dan transformed into a genuine substance, not only could Ji Hao's power be improved by hundreds of times, all of other magical sorceries he had learned before, would also gain more unpredictable possibilities. Just a little bit more. Ji Hao gnashed his teeth and murmured. His ears slightly moved along with the wind. In the storm, a subtle footstep sound at thousands of feet away clearly reached his ear, but fortunately, the power of Yuan Dan at the moment is enough. At least my 5 senses have been improved by more than 10 times. Slightly waving her hands, Man carefully jumped down from the tree with a pale face. Ji Hao carried her on his back, carefully checked the tree trunk, avoided the direction which the sound of footstep came from, then walked towards the north with big steps. Their opportunities were in the south, however, within the area of hundreds of miles around. The paths that lead to the south had all been completely blocked. Unless Ji Hao wanted to meet those horrible Jia clan warriors, who he was not yet powerful enough to deal with, he could only go north. Both, the Fire Crow clan and Man's father's territories, were in the south. Every step more he moved towards the north, the more dangerous the road would be, but Ji Hao had no other choices. He could only head to the north first, and try his best to survive the hunting of the Blood Fang, then figure out a way back to the south. Neither Man nor he himself was powerful enough to fight against the Blood Fang at the moment. After Ji Hao left, all of the raindrops that surrounded those dead bodies of the slave warriors, who were killed by Ji Hao just now, suddenly shattered into a watery mist. Besides the 20 dead Blood Fang's slave warriors, a gigantic silhouette over 4 meters tall, silently emerged. This was a bronze-skinned Jia clan warrior, with 2 pairs of brightly shining eyes, and 2 heavy saw-tooth machetes held in his hands. This Jia clan warrior took a glance at those dead bodies, then stamped his foot against the ground in anger. Stamped by the Jia clan warrior, the piece of ground within the radius of 1,000 feet silently shook, and tens of towering trees suddenly turned into wooden fragments, falling to the ground. The Jia clan warrior slightly twitched his nose, then grinned ear to ear. "Little bastards, I smell the scent of blood from you." Not the boy, but the little girl. He let out a creepy smile, then chased after Ji Hao. The gigantic body of the Jia clan warrior seemed as light as that of a phantom. When running in the jungle, he didn't make even the slightest sound. He rushed towards the direction that Ji Hao just had gone to. While running, his nose was twitching intensely, trying to catch the slight traces of the scent that was left by Ji Hao and Man in the storm. Every Jia clan warrior had a certain part of their body that was extremely strengthened. Without a doubt, this Jia clan warrior's special ability was his nose. His nose was hundreds, even thousands of times more sensitive than his other clansmen, making him the top-rank hunter amongst the entire blood fawn. Award. HM. That kid Di Luo, though he's a bit crazy, but he is much more generous than Lord Di Sha. That scary man, Di Sha, has left. With Di Luo's personality, we will get much more benefits. The Jia clan warrior laughed in a low voice while running. This is not bad at all. Ji Hao wouldn't risk using any special abilities or magic, and only used a skill that could lighten his own body, and was running in the jungle as fast as he could. He had to carefully choose the landing spot: soft soil, thick moss, dropped tree barks. Too many things could leave traces and lead the enemies to them. In order to keep Man and himself alive, he had to be extremely cautious. Blocking their way was 1,000 feet tall cliff. Ji Hao frowned and looked at the surrounding jungle, thinking about how to climb up. 3 miles behind him, the Jia clan warrior had been twitching his nose and located Ji Hao's direction. Laughing with an odd voice, the Jia clan warrior abruptly leapt high into the air, flew across the 3 miles within a moment, then shouted out aloud and threw a heavy punch towards Man, who had been carried on Ji Hao's back. "Little thing, you're mine." Chapter 95, Kill the Monster. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 95. Kill the monster. The cliff, which was over 1,000 feet tall and miles in length, blocked Ji Hao's way like a city wall. Ji Hao had been thinking about how to climb up to the cliff top without leaving a trace behind. In the meanwhile, he didn't relax his vigilance for even a little bit. Once the Jia clan warrior leapt up into the air, Ji Hao had located his direction and predicted his movement. When the Jia clan warrior split the air and flew towards Ji Hao like a shooting star, attempting to throw a punch to Man, who had been carried on Ji Hao's back, Ji Hao turned his head back and let out a great shout with his fingers locked together. The dark pupils of his suddenly turned into a golden red color, and 9 looming spell symbols started rotating fast around both his pupils. Ji Hao's sensitive soul power suddenly spread towards the surrounding area, like an octopus which had stretched all of its tentacles. In this moment, Ji Hao felt like he was the god of this small area. He clearly sensed the existence of the vast and unmeasurable universal power surrounding him. Although he was still too weak, and could only borrow a tiny little bit of the inexhaustible universal power from the surrounding jungle, it was enough for him to save himself and Man from this sudden danger. Dilvi Ko. Ji Hao loudly chanted the mantra Dan with 9 secret words, and at the same time, he gathered all of his spiritual power into his Yuan Dan. In the very next moment, the power of Yuan Dan gushed out like a roaring wave, suddenly drawing the universal power, which was hundreds of times greater than Ji Hao's own power, inwards. The ground started shaking slightly. A stone wall, tens of feet thick, came out of the ground in front of the Jia clan warrior and blocked his way. At the same time, Ji Hao growled out and let out his fiery wings. The pair of glowing, fiery wings flapped instantly and brought Ji Hao and Man up on top of the 1,000 feet tall cliff. within a minute and disappeared into the boundless dense jungle on the cliff top. Only shreds of afterimages had been left behind. Ji Hao hadn't used the fiery wings before the Jia clan warrior showed up, because he was afraid that the sense of power that would be released from the fiery wings would alert the Blood Fang's warriors. However, since some of them had already found him, then the only choice he had was do whatever he could and get away to the cliff top, leaving as soon as possible. At the moment when Ji Hao triggered his power, he clearly saw the cruelty and greediness, which was as great as a tsunami, in all of the 4 eyes of that Jia clan warrior, who had tried to sneak attack them from behind. He instantly read the Jia clan warrior's mind. This guy had been attempting to get all the credit for himself. Di Luo must have promised a wealthy reward for the warriors who could capture Ji Hao alive, and this Jia clan warrior wanted to have all of those rewards all for himself. One of the preconditions of monopolizing all of the credit was that there had to be no other Jia clan's warriors around, who would be able to compete with this one, nearby. This meant that no other Jia clan's warriors were present within the area for 10 miles around. Thinking like this, Ji Hao fully released the power of the fiery wings and directly flew onto the cliff top. Followed by a muffled boom, the Jia clan's warrior shattered the stone wall that had been summoned by Ji Hao, with a heavy punch. Afterwards, the gigantic body of his flashed across the air like a ghost, and reached the cliff top as well. Another step forwards, the Jia clan warrior had also disappeared into the dense jungle, and left a slight few afterimages behind. Warriors from the Jia clan were tall and sturdy, however, with their own special and secret fighting abilities. Their movements were also agile and flexible, even a bit faster than the current Ji Hao. The gigantic Jia clan warrior soon caught up with Ji Hao after a few rise and fall motions, closely following him in the jungle. "Little guy, I have already found you, you can never run away." The Jia clan warrior was gasping heavily in excitement, while laughing viciously in a low voice, and said, "If you just stop running and kneel on the ground, surrender to me, I promise I will only break your legs and arms, and won't do any more brutal things to you. But, if you keep running, then, do not blame me for doing some things to you. And this little girl, those things would be beautiful to hear and see to me, but a little bit too cruel to you. Especially this little girl." Lord Di Luo only said to kill her, never mentioned what method to use. The Jia clan warriors laughed out cruelly, a trace of primitive beastliness could be sensed from his laughter. Ji Hao spun his body fast, bringing up swirling winds, and avoided a few huge trees that were in the way. However, that Jia clan warrior had been running as fast as a gust of wind. His movements were more agile and speedy than Ji Hao, his steps were bigger and faster than Ji Hao as well. He jinked for a few times and easily avoided the couple of trees, then abruptly appeared in front of Ji Hao, blocking Ji Hao's way with his sturdy body, as if it was a thick wall. The Jia clan warrior was worried that he might hack Ji Hao to death, so he put the pair of heavy and long saw-tooth machete back into their sheaths, then spread his hands and slapped downwards towards Ji Hao. An odd swishing sound came from the air, followed by which, the pair of palms of the Jia clan warrior suddenly expanded many times larger, beating towards Ji Hao's head like 2 hills, along with a fierce gust of wind. This was probably one of the special abilities of the Jia clan's warriors. The Jia clan warrior had completely blocked all of the possible directions for Ji Hao to flee, only with a pair of hands. The fierce wind that was brought up by the pair of huge hands, which had suddenly swelled many times larger, made Ji Hao feel like it was hard to breathe. The air in surrounding area seemed frozen, and the daylight had dimmed down, even the space seemed to be twisting along with the movements of the Jia clan warrior's pair of hands. "You can never run away." "Never," yelled the Jia clan warrior. He then started murmuring, "All of the rewards that Lord Di Luo had promised, are mine. And that pretty Magus priestess. Maybe, I could have some extra benefits too." Ji Hao sensed an ice-cold like despair from his own heart. His pupils shrank into the size of a needlepoint and stared at the Jia clan warrior with a cold expression. Almost all of the Jia clan's warriors had reached the senior level. Their movements were more agile and faster, and their strength was much greater than his. Moreover, their 5 senses were more sensitive than Ji Hao. They had suppressed Ji Hao from all aspects, therefore, standing in front of them, if Ji Hao showed even a slight trace of hesitation or fear, both man and he could only die. When people come into an unavoidable confrontation, the dauntless one will win, said Ji Hao, before letting out a deep growl. Suddenly, all of his meridians swelled inside his body. He had activated the Fall of the Nine Stars, a life-risking fighting magic which was contained in the Mantra Dan of 9 secret words. In his previous life, the Fall of the Nine Stars was a horrifying fighting magic that would cost the user's life. After Ji Hao had activated this magic, countless cracks appeared on his internal organs. While spewing blood, Ji Hao grinned coldly, and puffed out his chest, facing the Jia clan warrior's palm, that was coming down towards him. Do not struggle, it's all useless, laughed the Jia clan warrior scornfully. Although he wasn't the most powerful warrior of the Blood Fang, and was only a warrior with the speciality of tracking abilities, he still had the power at the senior level. How could Ji Hao compete with him? A desperate, little wild cat could never beat a lion. The Jia clan warrior was laughing madly and silently. His greedy eyes took a glance at the little face of Man, which seemed especially lovingly delicate in fear and panic. In the next moment, his hands heavily slapped on Ji Hao's chest, which had been puffed out and was expecting his attack. When his hands hit on Ji Hao's chest, the Jia clan warrior even subconsciously retracted 50% of the power, because he didn't want to smash Ji Hao to death. The tight armor worn by Ji Hao, made by Pe, instantly released a faint and clear light. The light quickly condensed into a dim silhouette of lotus, firmly blocking the incredible power that came from the Jia clan's palms. Gold Crow Armor, the fourth special ability of Ji Hao, had been activated as well. Countless feather-like spell symbols emerged on Ji Hao's skin, split and softened the hurricane that was transformed by the horrible power of the Jia clan warrior's hands. The hurricane then blew past Ji Hao's body. The perfect sky opening, launched by the mysterious man, flashed back in front of Ji Hao's eyes in his mind. Ji Hao then thrust his right hand while the cracking sounds continuously came from all of the bones, muscles and tendons all over his body, as if his body couldn't bear his power anymore. With the power of the Fall of the Nine Stars, he forcibly launched the most powerful sky opening that he could reach with his current power. A dim light flashed on his fingertip. Ji Hao's finger was like the finger of a ghost, nimbly breaking through the only slight rib between his two hands, and lightly pointed at the Jia clan warrior's throat. With only one attack, the Adam's apple of the Jia clan warrior was shattered, and his neck bone was broken into pieces. The Jia clan warrior could only let out a very muffled moan, then fell to the ground with his face towards the sky. Soon, the huge head of the Jia clan warrior exploded. Ji Hao staggered, almost rolling into the jungle while vomiting large amounts of blood. Chapter 96, First Kill. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 96. First Kill, the Two Little Kids. They're just nearby. A three-eyed young man squatted on the ground, and lightly dipped a little bit of blood from the ground with his finger that had been spat out by Ji Hao. The man then sneered and said in a deep voice, "He is gravely hurt to the bones and internal organs, it is bad. He can't even run." The three-eyed young man then thrust his tongue out, put the slight bit of blood on the tip of his tongue and carefully tasted it, then affirmed, "He is only 30 miles away from here, at the most. Lord Di Luo, he is indeed seriously injured, and this blood was spat out by him not long ago, he couldn't have run too far." Di Luo was standing beside this young man. The handsome face of his had now gone purple with rage, wind-like shadows had been flashing across the erect eye between his eyebrows, and solid wind power with fierce, arm-thick gusts circled around his body, which even brought his slim body up from the ground and kept floating into the air. Di Sha had been leading the Blood Fang and fighting in this southern wasteland for a whole 500 years, and none of the Jia clan's warriors had died during that time period. Di Luo had led the Blood Fang only for a few days and one Jia clan's warrior had already died. Moreover, it had been an elite warrior, who had developed his special gift on his nose, and gained special abilities on tracking enemies. Are you saying that they're no more than 30 miles from here? Then make this place the center, and gather all our people over. I want you to search the jungle within 100 miles around, inch by inch, yelled Di Luo in a low voice with his teeth gnashing, that little bastard, and that little bitch, capture them alive, alive. I only want them captured alive. Resonant whistles came from the jungle, as one faded, another rose. Tall and strong Jia clan's warriors who had been silently darting in and out of the watery mist, like a group of ghosts and large groups of slave warriors who had been rushing across the jungle, with all kinds of weapons held in their hands. Additionally, large amounts of metal, sword-edged spiders and huge centipedes, were crawling around the jungle. Hovering in the air were thumb-sized, metal hummingbird puppets, which had been released from the metal centipedes' bodies. Thousands of exquisitely crafted hummingbird puppets spread in the air above the area within a radius of 100 miles, forming a gigantic net, while watching the entire jungle. Ji Hao had been lying under a big tree and was gasping with difficulty. He split the star mushroom that he had picked earlier, into two, a half for Man-Man and a half for himself. The star mushroom instantly melted after being put into his mouth, turning into a strand of cool power and flushed all over his body like a chilly stream. Finally, the popping sounds which continuously coming from inside Ji Hao's body, like the sounds made by bow strings when they suddenly were broken, had stopped. His body that had been so close to exploding, had stopped from worsening. The collapse of the 9 stars was a powerful fighting magic that would burn the user's life energy and blood until eventually costing the user's life. Added with the incomparable power of the sky opening, the current body of Ji Hao was unable to take the horrible counterforce that was caused by the combined launching of the sky opening and the collapse of the 9 stars. By using the collapse of the 9 stars and sky opening together, Ji Hao's tendons, bones, skins, flesh and all the internal organs were nearly shattered into pieces. Fortunately, he had absorbed some essence milk of the earth and 1 piece of earth essence crystal, which made the quality of his body far beyond than of those ordinary junior magi. Moreover, large amounts of senior magi blood had been continuously digested by the multicolored flame and was replenishing his body. With all of these together, his body had been barely spared from exploding. Nourished by the vast life force energy contained in the star mushroom, just now, Ji Hao's wounds stopped from worsening. The multicolored flame in his lower abdomen was fleetingly transforming the sphere of senior magi blood into multicolored light streams, which then quickly merged into his whole body. The body parts that had merged with the multicolored light streams quickly started healing, even those bones that had broken into fragments, only pieced together by a thin layer of periosteum, had started wriggling and healing, even becoming stronger and firmer than before. Ji Hao laid under that huge tree like a puddle of mud while twitching intensely and healing his own body as quickly as he could. However, the recovery of his body that had almost shattered into pieces had brought him unbearable great pain and itching, which made Ji Hao want to cry out, but he even failed to squeeze out any tears. More than once, he was on the verge of passing out because of the pain. Luckily, Ji Hao's Yuan Dan had almost condensed into a substantial, solid being, and the strong Yuan Dan gave him an incredibly strong willpower that allowed him to hold the pain back and try his best to keep a slight trace of consciousness. Suddenly, Ji Hao heard a subtle noise coming from about 100 feet away. In a flurry, he patted the head of Man-Man, who had been lying behind him, and pointed at a small tree hole next to him. Man-Man took a glance at Ji Hao, and hid into the tree hole, without saying a word. Soon, the watery mist silently dispersed. A Jia clan's warrior, whose skin was a bronze color and with a black iron-like luster, slowly walked out from behind a gigantic tree. His 4 eyes were shining with a black, cold light, giving an extremely sharp and heartless feeling. You, alone, the Jia clan warrior looked around vigilantly. The watery mist surrounding Ji Hao started rotating slowly, shrouding his entire body and the tree hole that Man-Man had hidden in. Ji Hao had been in the center of the scent of blood that was emitted from his own body, the dense scent of blood had been spreading everywhere, along with the rotating of the watery mist. This perfectly covered man's breath and her scent. "Yeah, I'm on my own." Ji Hao let out a bitter smile difficultly, and said. His body was so badly damaged, that it hardly even looked like a human's body. Although his body had been quickly healing, he still didn't have the strength to even move. After he had killed the Jia clan's warrior who had been tracking them alone just now, he had madly ran for tens of miles, consuming the last bit of his power. "I'm seriously injured, I can die here, but not that little girl." Ji Hao looked at the Jia clan's warrior and said honestly, "If anything happens to her, my Abba, Alma will all be in huge trouble. So I told her to run away by herself." The Jia clan's warrior hesitated a bit, then suddenly moved at lightning speed, and brought up tens of wisps of afterimages, quickly circling around the area within 100 feet in radius. He even got up on the treetop and carefully searched on the tree for a while. A while later, this Jia clan's warrior leapt down from the treetop satisfyingly, stood in front of Ji Hao and carelessly looked down at him, laughed and said, "You didn't lie, little kid. That little girl did run by herself. But, how far do you think she can run to?" The Jia clan's warrior then bent his waist and grabbed Ji Hao's neck, and pulled him up from the ground. Ji Hao was pulled up from the ground, till his face was about to touch the bronze face of the Jia clan's warrior. The Jia clan's warrior carefully observed Ji Hao's face for a while, then shook his head scornfully, and said, "Did you just kill Tadi? That poor kid, he had a good nose, but strangely unlucky. How could he die at the hands of a barbaric kid? The glory of his entire family extinguished because of him." Before the voice of the Jia clan's warrior had faded, his face suddenly twisted, his bronze-colored face quickly turned deadly pale. His eyes showed fear, dropping Ji Hao on the ground, heading down and staring at the tiny little fist of man that had broken through his metal armor, deeply into his body, and tightly grabbed his spine. "I will not let you kill Ji Hao." Man's face was covered in tears, which had mixed with the rainwater. She growled to the Jia clan's warrior with an incomparable determined tone, "You horrible monsters. I will let Abba kill you all. Not a single one of you can leave the southern wasteland alive." A beam of red light flashed across man's palm. The scary strength of man had been activated. In the next moment, the Jia clan warrior's spine, which was as thick as an ordinary man's lap, and thousands of times harder than steel, was instantly crushed into pieces by man's little palm. A great heat gushed out of man's palm, suddenly setting the middle of the Jia clan warrior's body ablaze. Within only a blink of an eye, the gigantic, strong man had been burnt into a pile of ash, and even the full steel armor that he had been wearing, was burnt into a stream of liquid. Man gnashed her teeth, carefully carried Ji Hao on her back, and quickly darted into the deeper jungle with small and gentle steps. Man has killed a man," cried man while murmuring, "Not that man killed him by accident, man indeed wanted to kill him, but man really killed a man this time. It's okay, you will get used to it when you kill more." Ji Hao let out a sigh, patted man's head and comforted her. Even Ji Hao felt that what he just said was terrible for comforting a little girl. Just as he thought, man started to cry even harder when she heard him say that. More shrill whistles came behind them along with an uncountable number of swooshing sounds, which were coming closer and closer. At least tens of Jia clan's warriors had discovered them. Chapter 97, A Difficult Situation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 97. A difficult situation. 5 days later, beside a rapidly flowing river in the jungle. 3 Jia clan's warriors, leading over 100 slave warriors, had encircled Ji Hao and man. The 3 Jia clan's warriors were holding heavy weapons, moving as fast as the wind. They had been madly attacking Ji Hao. Occasionally, their attacks hit on Ji Hao's body and caused muffled, loud booms like thunder. All of these powerful Jia clan's warriors were at the senior level. Every single attack that was launched by them was powerful enough to destroy a mountain. However, the armor made by Pa was incredibly firm. The inconspicuous dim light streams that were being emitted from it had been circling around Ji Hao, condensing into a palm-sized lotus, and was closely attached onto Ji Hao's body. No matter how powerful those heavy weapons that swung towards Ji Hao were, this lotus could turn most of the powers into nothingness, by only slowly rotating. Ji Hao had also activated the Gold Crow armor, the fourth special ability he possessed. Countless feather-like spell symbols emerged on his skin and connected with each other, moving and rotating on Ji Hao's skin like water streams. Although those three Jia clan warriors' attacks could never really hurt Ji Hao, at the very least, it should have pushed Ji Hao to fleeing away and not been able to stand steady. However, the Gold Crow armor had magical power which was able to make all attacking powers disappear. Therefore, all of the power of those attacks, launched by the three Jia clan warriors, had been diffused by those feather-like spell symbols. With the protection of these spell symbols, Ji Hao's body had only taken a slight bit of the impact that was not even worth mentioning. Therefore, although the three Jia clan's warriors had been attacking Ji Hao simultaneously, Ji Hao could still hold the long, sharp sword, and fight against them for this long. With Ji Hao's life force energy, which was strong enough, the small half of his injured hand been healed by the multicolored light. During these 5 days, at least, he could now flexibly use the sword without any difficulties. The Gold Crow pupils were also activated. 9 spell symbols were slowly rotating around Ji Hao's pupils. The movements of the three enemies were indeed as fast as a fierce gust of wind, and their steps were weird and unpredictable, but with these pair of pupils, Ji Hao could still clearly see about 50 to 60% of all their moves that were made by the three Jia clan warriors. Occasionally, Ji Hao's long sword would be swung in the air, and threw out a mysterious arc light, which flashed across the heavy weapons of the three Jia clan's warriors. Every single time this sharp and bright light would accurately hit on the vital and soft parts of the three Jia clan warriors, such as eyeballs, mouths, and throats. This time, Ji Hao didn't risk his life and activated the collapse of the 9 stars. Although he was unable to break away from the encirclement of the three Jia clan's warriors with his own power, after the span of every 3 to 5 breaths, Ji Hao could hit the vital parts of one of them every time. Therefore, the longer this fight continued, the less confident the three Jia clan warriors became, and the more frightened they were. They had been working for the Blood Fang, capturing and selling slaves in the southern wasteland for 200 to 300 years. During all this time, they had pillaged countless of people from this land, and been through at least thousands of different fights of differing scales. In their minds, the powers of the southern wasteland warriors were strictly divided, just like their personalities. The novice magi could never beat the junior-level magi, and the junior-level magi had no chance to beat the senior-level magi. As for senior magi, the power of senior magi on different levels had distinct disparities as well. Due to their different bloodlines they had and different numbers of Magus acupoints they had awakened. In the southern wasteland, there were no such things as a Magus challenging other higher-level magi. However, the sense of power that kept being released from Ji Hao's body, clearly showed that he was only a bottom-level junior magi. How could this little kid, who had just activated his bloodline power, be fighting against 3 powerful senior-level warriors for this long, and showing no sign of losing? Judging from the power levels, Ji Hao was definitely weaker than the 3 of them, but in the case of the current situation, it was hard to tell which side would win. Even when judging on basis of the effectiveness of attacks, you would find that Ji Hao's long sword had accurately hit the vital parts of the three Jia clan warriors, which made the attacks launched by Ji Hao seem more threatening. This little monster, we can't let him leave. One Jia clan warrior shouted out, "Let's try our best and catch him alive. Don't wait for the others to come. Or we're going to have to share a big half of our reward with them." The three Jia clan's warriors were now extremely irritated. It had been 5 days. After Ji Hao killed the second Jia clan warrior, they somehow managed to hide and flee in this jungle for an entire 5 days, and during this time period, another 2 Jia clan warriors and hundreds of slave warriors were killed by Ji Hao and Man Man. This great loss had made Di Luo completely lose his mind. He was thrown into anxiety and confusion, and had completely no idea about what to do next. Those elite Blood Fang's warriors, who had been bullying others in the southern wasteland for 500 years, without losing even one of their own, were nearly driven crazy by Ji Hao. They were now inwardly seeing the mission of capturing Man-Man and Ji Hao alive as an unrestrained gambling opportunity, apart from the rewards that had been promised by Di Luo, which turned out to be increasing day by day. These elite warriors had also laid whopping price wagers to each other. Try our best and capture him. Thinking about all the kinds of rewards and benefits they would get, once they had caught Ji Hao, the three Jia clan warriors couldn't help but dribble. They started launching attacks as hard as they could. At this moment, all of their concentration was on Ji Hao, and none of them had paid any attention to Man-Man, who had been hunkering down on the ground, looking like a poor, little animal. All three of the Jia clan's warriors released all of their powers. The pupils of two of them suddenly turned yellow, their bodies then started quickly swelling like balloons, streams of yellow light started flashing across their bodies. Their originally 3 meters tall bodies soon swelled to become around 6 meters tall, and the power of every single attack launched by them had been improved by several times. The other Jia clan warrior's 4 pupils had turned into a sharp, cold silver color. His body didn't change as much as that his 2 teammates, however, his every single movement started to release a horrible stream of cold power after his pupils had changed color. This kind of cold power wasn't as powerful as the magic powers or special abilities of the Magi, which could attack enemies in tens, even hundreds of miles away. This power only relied on the body of the Jia clan warrior, attached to his body and weapons, and attack his enemies closely. However, this power was bone-piercing cold. After Ji Hao had been hit by the long sword held in that Jia clan warrior's hand, a thin layer of ice had appeared on Ji Hao's skin, and the speed of his attacks and defense had been suddenly slowed by half. Followed by a few loud booms, the 2 Jia clan warriors, whose bodies had expanded by several times, hit hard against Ji Hao's body. 2 heavy and huge hammers were madly swung towards Ji Hao's body over and over again, as if they were forging a piece of iron. Even the armor made by Pe and the Gold Crow armor were unable to protect Ji Hao completely from this. Forces of great impact hit against Ji Hao's body one after another, and although Po's armor and the Gold Crow armor had taken 90.9% of the impact forces away for Ji Hao, the last bit of the power of the attack still made Ji Hao spew blood. At the same time, his bones started cracking. This kid's bones are so damn hard. Is he really only a junior Magus, who just had his bloodline power activated? The 3 Jia clan warriors became more and more distraught. They had already released all of their special abilities, but how come they still couldn't beat Ji Hao? Who on earth had been teaching this freak to fight? Just for the one moment the 3 Jia clan warriors became upset and impatient. Ji Hao suddenly opened his mouth and let out a huge sphere of flame, along with a loud flaming sound. The thick, lava-like Gold Crow flames instantly shrouded the area within a radius of 100 feet, and enveloped all the 3 Jia clan's warriors and the hundreds of slave warriors. The terrifying heat burnt the hundreds of slave warriors into ashes within only a moment. The metal armors worn by the 3 Jia clan's warriors suddenly emitted a bright light and held back the attack of the flames. Different colored flames clashed against each other and created loud, muffled booms. The 3 Jia clan warriors covered their own faces with their hands, trying to fend against the great heat that was coming towards them. At exactly this moment, Man-Man, who had stayed still during all this time, suddenly leapt high into the air while growling with rage, and darted onto a Jia clan warrior's shoulder like the most vigorous monkey. She then held the gigantic head of the Jia clan warrior with both of her arms, and pulled it hard aside. Along with a clear popping sound, the Jia clan warrior's head was plucked off from his body. 1, 2, 3, the 3 Jia clan's warriors hadn't even noticed Man-Man, before she had torn their heads off in such a horrible way. 3 gigantic bodies fell hard on the ground, splashing the blood all over. Ji Hao gasped for air, then coughed another mouthful of blood up. Sounds of hurried footsteps abruptly came from the surrounding area. It was Di Luo, and hundreds of Jia clan warriors, along with thousands of slave warriors led by them. All of these enemies were coming from all directions. Not only from the dense jungle in front of Ji Hao and Man, even from the broad river behind them, large groups of slave warriors rode sword-edged spiders and leapt out. Chapter 98, Magus King's Tomb. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Note: we have changed Magus Priest and Magus Priestess to Magus Priest and Magus Priestess. Chapter 98. Magus King's Tomb. How Man, whose entire body had been covered in blood, ran up to Ji Hao and carefully grabbed his sleeve. Ji Hao lightly patted Man's head, smilingly shook his head towards her and said, "It's okay, don't be afraid." The rainstorm had never stopped, and the boundless sky was filled with dark clouds, while lightning bolts madly fell down from the sky one after another, just like furious dragons. On every mountain top, a few towering trees were hit by the lightning bolts, exploded and were set ablaze along with thunderous booms, like huge torches standing under the sky. The raging roars of beasts were coming from unknown directions. The long and resonant roars reached the sky, and mixed with the growling of the thunder, gigantic trees were blazing on top of those mountains, and the storm had been sweeping over the entire jungle. The southern wasteland had been wantonly showing its crazy, violent, wild and primitive side. Clang, clang. The metallic feet of the sword-edged spiders clashed against the stones at the sides of the river. Tens of sword-edged spiders, surrounded by thousands of slave warriors, jumped up from the river behind Ji Hao, slowly approaching Ji Hao and Man. Large groups of Jia clan's warriors and more slave warriors had been following them, tightly packing this part of the river bank. Jiang Yao showed up. She was gorgeously dressed, wearing an extra luxurious and stunning, purple silk long dress, which was very incompatible with the southern wasteland style. The woman, who looked like a beautiful, poisonous papaver flower, turned her slim waist, while holding Di Luo's hand, and walked towards Ji Hao dramatically. One of Di Luo's hands was held behind his body, while his other hand was held by Jiang Yao. The white and delicate face of his had been filled with a twisted, bone-deep hatred. Di Luo stared at Ji Hao with an incomparably vicious expression, and walked over along with Jiang Yao. Both of them had been extra cautious this time. They were surrounded by 30 Jia clan's warriors, who were the most powerful, elite warriors amongst the entire blood Fang. All of these warriors were holding their heavy weapons tightly, while violently staring at Ji Hao and Man with their eyes, which were shining with bright lights. None of these blood Fang warriors were cowards, it was just that they nearly all had been driven crazy by the unreasonable fighting record of Ji Hao and Man. It had been only 5 to 6 days, yet more than 10 Jia clan's warriors had been killed by them. In the fights that they had been through, consisting of varying scales, such things had never happened to the blood Fang, in the past 500 years. They had attacked tens of thousands of different scale clans, killed more than tens of thousands of senior magi. Even those senior magi couldn't cause this much of a loss to the elite warriors of the blood Fang. However, both Ji Hao and Man were only little kids, around 10 years old. Man had not even had her 10-year-old birthday yet. "Ji Hao, you damn little bastard." Jiang Yao walked to less than 100 feet away from Ji Hao and yelled. The first sentence she threw out was a malicious curse. "Are you saying that your son was a bastard?" Even during an oral argument, Ji Hao would never let others win. He responded with a more vicious taunt, "I'm pretty sure that I am the biological son of my Abba and Amma. But, as for your precious son, Wu Jiang Yao, are you sure that he came from you and Ji Shu? Not a, bastard, of you and this three-eyed freak." The beautiful face of Jiang Yao instantly became twisted when she heard Ji Hao, her nostrils suddenly became wider and she started gasping quickly and heavily. Di Luo grabbed Jiang Yao's hands and said after a ferocious, yet proud sneer, "Little guy, you have a vicious tongue, just like your fighting strategies. But, I kinda think you've just made a right point. Maybe, in the future, probably, I will have a son with the southern wasteland bloodline. In fact, it's not bad at all." Man spat towards the ground and yelled loudly, "You shameless stinking woman." Pausing for a second, Man tried to make it sound worse, so she added another word. Whore. Jiang Yao's face turned purple in rage, her lips even started trembling. She glared at Man and said with a very wicked voice, "Little girl, you've got some balls. But, the more loudly you curse, the uglier you will die. Guess, how will I torture you?" Man didn't say anything. Ji Hao abruptly said to Di Luo, "Do you think it'll be worth it? I mean, everything you have done for this woman. Your blood Fong had lost so many people already, and because of your foolishness, you will certainly lose more. How would you explain that to the people who have been supporting you? By telling them that it was only for this woman." Di Luo showed a slight trace of hesitation when he heard Ji Hao, then took a glance at Man. Ji Hao didn't give him too much time to think, and he instantly continued, "You're right. Man comes from a very noble family. Probably, just because of your stupid thoughts and actions, your entire blood Fong will be wiped out from the southern wasteland. That all will happen only because of this woman. Can I say something that might not sound sweet? I don't feel that with your family background, you will be lacking any women." Di Luo was about to say something, but Jiang Yao gnashed her teeth and yelled out, "Di Luo. Don't let this little bastard delude you. What your blood Fong has lost, I will make it all up to you. I can give you more than you can imagine. Beside what I have promised you before, I can give you even more rewards." Ji Hao gave a sneer and said, "Are you talking about more rewards? What will that be? Are you planning to give your other sisters or nieces to these three-eyes freaks too?" Di Luo frowned, threw a glance full of displeasure at Jiang Yao and said, "I can have as many women as I want. My dear Magus priestess, obviously, what I have done for you, is way more than what you can offer me." Jiang Yao sneered as well, fixed her eyes on Ji Hao and said, "Ji Hao, do you know why I have been trying so hard so kill you and your Abba?" Ji Hao remained silent for a while then asked with a little bit of doubt, "The leader's poison of the Fire Crow clan. For Ji Shu's slave trade business with the Blood Fong. For letting your Abba, Jiang Bo, control the Fire Crow clan through Ji Shu, and gain more power and interests from our clan. What else? I don't think any of these can bring Di Luo enough benefits." Jiang Yao glanced at Di Luo, whose face had gone darker, then took a 1-foot square, gold-red leather out of her sleeve. A sphere of bright fiery light had wrapped around the leather piece. Once Jiang Yao took it out, the leather piece seemingly sensed something attractive, and slowly flew towards Ji Hao. At last, the leather piece tightly attached onto Ji Hao's chest. Ji Hao sensed a strand of very pure and great, hot power suddenly gushed into his body. He also felt that something hidden inside his cloth started beating quicker. Ji Hao surprisingly raised his eyebrows, smiled, and then asked, "What is this?" Jiang Yao took a deep glance at Ji Hao and said calmly, "Just as I thought, this is an inherited object. The power and message contained in it can only be sensed by a few of the Fire Crow clan's clansmen, who have the same origin as you do. This is a map, leading to an ancient Magus king's tomb." Ancient Magus king's tomb. Ji Hao quivered intensely. Did she say an ancient Magus king's tomb? Could the tomb and himself sense each other? How could this happen? Was it because of their senses of bloodline powers were attracting each other? Although clansmen from the entire Fire Crow clan had Ji as their last name, and all of them had inherited the power from the ancient three-legged gold Fire Crow, according to the differences of bloodlines that they have inherited, the Fire Crow clan's bloodline had been divided into hundreds of branch bloodlines, and formed hundreds of different scale branch clans. The branch bloodline that was possessed by Ji Xia, Ji Hao and their direct relatives had become very thin by now, which was because, except Ji Hao and Ji Xia, all of their other relatives had all died in uncountable fights against the Black Water Serpent clan. The branch clan that shared the same bloodline with Ji Hao and Ji Xia had a flourishing time in the history of the Fire Crow clan. Amongst their ancestors, there were countless Magus kings and especially powerful magi. The peak time of their branch clan was also the most prosperous period of the entire Fire Crow clan. Back then, the Fire Crow clan was one of the most powerful clans in the southern wasteland. The opening of the ancient Magus King's tomb requires the blood of the Fire Crow clan Magus King's offsprings, who possessed the same bloodline as the owner of the tomb, said Jiang Yao while looking at Ji Hao coldly. Therefore, I have to get you and Ji Xia killed. Not only that I need your spirit blood, 1, to open the tomb, but also only after you two have died, and the sense of your bloodline power has been wiped out from this world, can I use those inherited treasures that are hidden in that tomb. Jiang Yao looked at Di Luo, who was totally stunned, smilingly tied his collar, and said, Lord Di Luo, what do you think we will find in the tomb that was left by the most powerful Magus King, amongst the 3 Magus Kings from the first 3 generations of the Fire Crow clan? Can you even imagine what kind of precious treasures were hidden in it? Compared to that, how much could a few warriors' lives be worth? Di Luo gasped deeply, thrust his hands out, pointed at Ji Hao and Man, and yelled out. Kill that little girl. Chop her into pieces. Burn her into ashes and throw her into the river. As for this little bastard, capture him alive. Alive. 1. Spirit blood. Blood that contained the power of its owner, like those senior magi blood Ji Hao had digested. TL note. Di Luo is even stupider than I thought, poor Di Sha, his older brother. Chapter 99, Breaking Jiang Yao. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 99. Breaking Jiang Yao. All of the Blood Fang warriors moved at once. So did Ji Hao. He grabbed Man and swung her onto his back. At the same time, the pair of fiery wings burst out from a dim sphere of fiery light behind his body along with a small caw. Ji Hao's wounds hadn't fully healed yet, therefore, his fiery wings were now much smaller and dimmer than usual. But still, followed by a fierce gust of the wind that was abruptly brought up by the fiery wings, Ji Hao turned around and darted towards the rapidly flowing river behind him, leaving tens of wisps of afterimages. In the rainy season, every single river in the southern wasteland jungle was flooding. The urgent river behind Ji Hao had been roaring and rolling, just like a raging yellow dragon, which was struggling and howling with all its power. Countless whirlpools were banging against each other and swallowing each other on the surface of the river, which was thousands of feet wide. Waves that were Zhangluan tall rose from time to time. A river in flood. Only if Ji Hao rushed into the river, would the senior magi be unable to easily grab him. Large groups of sword-edged spiders rushed up from the surrounding area. Dark-skinned slave warriors, who had been standing on the backs of those gigantic metal spiders, opened their thick lips, and growled at Ji Hao. They raised their heavy crossbows and pulled the strings open, aiming at Ji Hao's body. However, none of them dared to shoot the arrows rashly at the moment. Di Luo had given an order, which stated that he wanted Ji Hao to be captured alive. This order had tied the hands and feet of these slave warriors. They were so afraid that their arrows would hurt the vital parts of Ji Hao's body. If it wasn't for that order, hundreds of crossbows would have shot altogether. Even if Ji Hao could run a time faster, he would hardly be able to keep Man and himself safe from hundreds of arrows. The sharp, long sword held in Ji Hao's hand was waving hard and brought up tens of feet long, sharp streams of air. Ji Hao growled out hoarsely, like the desperate roar that was let out by a wounded beast. A bright, piercing light flashed across the sword, and what came out was arc-shaped, swift and fierce streams of air, which chopped off all of the metal feet of those sword-edged spiders, along with the bodies of those slave warriors, who had been riding on the metal spiders. A step to travel 100 feet far, Ji Hao quickly took 5 steps forward, and sliced a whole line of slave warriors in front of him within a moment. After that he broke through the large groups of the slave warriors, who had been guarding beside the river. Beams of cold light that were sent out by the long sword flashed across the air interweaving, and sent the bleeding bodies of over 200 of slave warriors into the air. Their muscular bodies fell apart in the air, and became pieces of bloody body parts which then fell back to the ground. The gigantic, metal bodies of tens of sword-edged spiders collapsed while twitching, sparks were coming out from their legs, which had been cut apart by Ji Hao, and the sounds of spell symbols exploding continuously came from their bodies. Di Luo started screaming in rage and anxiety. He madly cursed, useless and incapable, at the warriors. Both Ji Hao and Man were seriously wounded, but still, so many elite warriors of the Blood Fang failed to stop them from running away. Especially at those slave warriors, Di Luo was angrily shouting and threatening that he would certainly degrade all of their families to the lowest slaves. All of these slave warriors were at the junior level, quite many of them were much more powerful than Ji Hao as well. However, their blockade had been easily broken by Ji Hao. Are you all Jurassic beasts? No. Jurassic beasts could at least be eaten. And what use do you have? While screaming and cursing in such a manner, Di Luo rushed towards Ji Hao in big steps. Gusts of fierce winds had been circling around his body, the erect eye located between his eyebrows suddenly opened, after which, the air within a few miles radius suddenly started to rolling intensely. Encircle him. Let me capture him by myself. You useless stupid things, shouted Di Luo confidently towards those Jia clan's warriors who had almost caught Ji Hao. Nearly 100 Jia clan's warriors had already rushed up from all directions and circled around Ji Hao. These elite Jia clan's warriors were much more efficient than those slave warriors, even 3 of them, who were especially powerful, were able to grab Ji Hao's shoulder if they would thrust their arms out. However, the loud shout of Di Luo and the fast-rolling air surrounding him, clearly indicated them that Di Luo had already released his special ability. The 3 Jia clan's warriors subconsciously slowed their movements down, letting Ji Hao keep running forwards. The Blood Fang, and the powerful organization that the Blood Fang belonged to, had extremely strict hierarchical rules. Di Luo was not only the leader of the Blood Fang, but also a man born in the 3 Daidu clan who possessed their noble bloodline as well. Therefore, although all of these Jia clan's warriors were much more powerful than Di Luo, they came from the Jia clan. The 4 Daidu Jia clan was a lot lower than the 3 Daidu clan in hierarchy. Therefore, these Jia clan warriors almost instinctively followed Di Luo's order, no matter how stupid or unnecessary the order was. The air in the area for miles around was rolling and shaking intensely. Countless raindrops had been stirred up by the fierce air streams, making it dart around in the air along with the storm, which had suddenly intensified. Followed by the swishing sounds, tank-sized, cyan, wind. Dragons started emerging from the air, one after another, crystal-like raindrops merged with the wind dragons' bodies and flew in the air at a very high speed. Occasionally, when the wind dragon swept across the rocks, those raindrops easily punctured the hard rocks, leaving countless numbers of small holes. Ji Hao had been rushing towards the river at his highest speed, however, after the wind dragons showed up, his movements gradually became slower. He felt that the air had become thicker and stickier, and both visible and invisible winds had bound his body, making it difficult for him to even make a single step forward. The afterimage, caused by his fleetingly fast movement, suddenly dissipated in the air. Ji Hao gnashed his teeth, and tried his best to step forward. However, the strong wind had wrapped his body tightly. Ji Hao spent all of his remaining power, but was unable to take another step forwards. Little guy, you have run out of your good luck. Di Luo held Jiang Yao's hand and said proudly while approaching Ji Hao step by step. Wing-like phantoms had been rotating fast inside the erect eye between his eyebrows. Have you felt it? Apart from making you unable to move, the wind that is being controlled by me has the special power of the blood moon. Do you feel your spirit power and bloodline power are fading away? Is your strength disappearing? Oh, my great blood moon, the most mysterious and powerful moon, amongst the highest 9 moons, I shall give you my praise. Ji Hao's body had been slightly trembling. Indeed, he felt that within the wind that was being controlled by Di Luo, was another cold and sticky power, which was trying to drill into his body through his pores, swallow his blood and take away his power. He turned his head back, looked at Di Luo, who had been holding Jiang Yao's hand and was proudly walking towards him in big steps. 100 zhang, ninety zhang. 10 zhang, 5 zhang. Ji Hao abruptly laughed out, and took the red tablet, the one man used to harm the mountain god the other day, out of his clothes. The glowing red tablet was wrapped by a blazing fire. Although the sun hadn't come out during these couple of days, Ji Hao had put the tablet with Mr. Crow, who had been badly wounded earlier. The hot power that was being released from Mr. Crow's body contained a small portion of the special sunlight power. The tablet had absorbed the sunlight power that came out from Mr. Crow's body, and had been refilled for about 70 to 80%. Additionally, Jiang Yao just had thrown the leather map at Ji Hao, and the leather map had then tightly attached onto Ji Hao's chest, sending a vast and great power into his body. With this strand of power, the tablet had been fully refilled. Ji Hao held the tablet in his hand, and Man thrust her arm out, grabbing the tablet as well. The two of them then laughed out loud simultaneously. Di Luo's facial expression suddenly froze. He subconsciously grabbed Jiang Yao's soft and tender neck and pulled her in front of himself. Jiang Yao screamed out with a piercing voice in fear. She had realized the danger as well, and took out a blood-red jade piece out and crushed it in her hand. In the next moment, a huge power, which was so great that it felt as if it had descended from the heaven, had been released. A sphere of red light came from the blood-red jade piece that just had been crushed by Jiang Yao, and wrapped up Jiang Yao's body. However, once the power of the tablet came out, the sphere of blood-red light suddenly shattered and quickly disappeared. A beam of red light darted out from the tablet, punctured Jiang Yao's head and hit hard against Di Luo's body. An eye-piercing white light burst out from the long and luxurious cloak worn by Di Luo, following which, 9 blood-red precious stones rose from his cloak, and combined into a twisted, odd spell symbol, firmly blocking the red light of the tablet. Along with loud popping sounds, the 9 precious stones exploded in a row. The red light, which had been half neutralized by the precious stones, then pierced Di Luo's chest. The dead body of Jiang Yao fell hard onto the ground. Her head had been completely evaporated by the red light. This time, the life-saving treasure that was given by Jiang Bo had failed to save her life. Di Luo was sent flying by the power of the red light while vomiting blood. All of the Jia clan's warriors paused all at once, looking at Di Luo and felt at loss, not knowing what to do next. Ji Hao took this opportunity, tightly held Man and jumped into the rapidly flowing river. 1 zhang. A unit of length, 1 equals 3/3 meters. TL note. She died. She died. Too easily though, but she's gone. ED note. Finally ED note, SR. I thought this day would never come #Crease from happiness.